Just celebrated 50 years of performing at the famed Grand Ole Opry, and country legend Loretta Lynn is still inspiring a new generation.
You ain't gonna believe this, but me and my little first cousin sang all the time, and when we were little.
At 90 years old, Loretta Lynn shocked the world with a revelation no one ever expected. The woman who had built her career on honesty, grit, and unshakable faith suddenly dropped a confession that was equal parts humorous, daring, and deeply human. Known as the coal miner's daughter, Loretta had lived her life in the spotlight, adored by millions for her music, and admired for her strength. But behind the rhinestones and stage lights, she was still a woman with secret desires and private fantasies. In one of her last unfiltered conversations, Loretta admitted there were 7 Hollywood actors she wanted to sleep with. 7 names she never spoke publicly until her golden years. It wasn't said for shock value, nor was it a scandal to be ashamed of. Instead, it was her way of showing fans that no matter how iconic or untouchable someone may seem, they are still human. Her honesty was refreshing, even at 90. And it reminded the world why she had always been more than just a country star. She was a truth-teller who never played by the rules of silence. Long before Loretta Lynn became a household name, she was Loretta Webb, a barefoot girl from the coal mining hills of Butcher Hollow, Kentucky. Her childhood was marked by poverty so deep that survival often came before dreams. She grew up in a small cabin with no running water, no electricity, and little to eat. Yet she carried within her a voice so powerful it could cut through the silence of hardship. Loretta never asked for fame. It came as the inevitable result of her honesty and her refusal to bow to anyone who told her no. By the time she was 15, she was already married to Oliver Doolittle Lynn, and before she turned 20, she was raising a house full of children. Her life was not the fairy tale many imagined. It was raw, chaotic, and full of battles she fought every day, both in her marriage and in her career. When she arrived in Nashville, the men who ran the country music business were not eager to make room for a tough, outspoken woman from the hills of Kentucky. But Loretta didn't wait for permission. She wrote songs about real life, cheating husbands, struggling wives, and the voices of women who had long been silenced. Songs like "Don't Come Home A-Drinkin'" and "The Pill" shocked the industry, but resonated with working-class women everywhere. She became not just an entertainer, but a symbol of resilience, the voice of truth that could not be ignored. Yet for all her strength, Loretta was still a woman who carried secrets. Behind the fiery lyrics and the public battles she waged with industry gatekeepers, she nurtured her softer side. The Loretta who admired the charm of Hollywood's leading men. The Loretta who privately giggled with girlfriends about who was the most handsome actor on the screen. She built an image of modesty and grit, but like anyone else, she was not immune to the sparkle of fame or the pull of desire. What made her confession at 90 so striking wasn't just the names she revealed. It was the fact that someone who had spent her whole life playing the role of America's traditional country sweetheart could still, in her twilight years, peel back the curtain and show a playful, human side of herself. This duality, Loretta the legend and Loretta the woman, was what made her so captivating. She was tough, but she was tender. She was a trailblazer, but she still carried simple fantasies. When she named the 7 actors she secretly longed for, it wasn't out of scandal or shame. It was an extension of the same honesty she had always carried into her music. Just as she had given women the courage to talk about love, heartbreak, and independence, she was now giving the world permission to admit to its most private desires. At 90 years old, Loretta Lynn wasn't just a country legend. She was still, at her core, that fearless girl from Butcher Hollow, who refused to hide the truth, no matter how shocking it might sound. When Loretta finally revealed the very first name on her list, it wasn't some obscure star or a quiet crush hidden from the public eye. It was a man whose face had been plastered across movie posters, whose charm dripped from every line he delivered, and whose reputation as a heartthrob was cemented long before Loretta Lynn ever set foot on a stage. She laughed as she said his name, almost as if she couldn't believe she was daring enough to admit it aloud, but her eyes betrayed no hesitation. This was the truth. The first name was James Dean. To Loretta, Dean represented everything dangerous, mysterious, and unattainable. His brooding stare, the rebel persona, the leather jackets and cigarettes, it was the exact opposite of the strict world she had grown up in. She had married young, lived a hard life raising children, and built her career on values that seemed miles away from Hollywood rebellion. Yet, when James Dean appeared on the big screen in films like Rebel Without a Cause, Loretta felt something stir inside her. She admitted that when she first saw him, she thought he was the most exciting man alive. Someone who embodied the kind of freedom she had never known as a young bride trapped in a cycle of survival. She would later joke that if she'd ever been in the same room with him, she might have fainted. Fans laughed, but beneath her humor was a startling honesty. Loretta never pretended she was immune to desire, and James Dean was her confession of youth, a symbol of a world far bigger than Butcher Hollow, a man whose untamed image mirrored the restless fire inside her own soul. What made this revelation even more shocking was that Dean died in 1955, long before Loretta ever became a superstar. He was frozen in time as Hollywood's ultimate bad boy, and Loretta, a young mother at the time, secretly kept him in the private chambers of her imagination. By the time she became famous, he was already gone, yet his image lingered in her memory as the first man she ever admitted she truly wanted outside of her marriage. The choice wasn't about logic, it was about fantasy, the kind that carried her away from the coal mines and the chaos of her husband's temper. She once said that James Dean was the kind of man who looked like he could drive you off a cliff and make you thank him for it. To many, it was shocking that Loretta, who had spent her career singing about strong morals and family life, would confess to desiring such a troubled figure, but to Loretta, it was simply truth. Desire doesn't choose saints, it chooses symbols, and James Dean was hers. That first name on the list set the tone for what was to come. Because if America's country sweetheart could openly admit her fascination with a Hollywood rebel who died young and wild, then no name was off limits. It wasn't scandal, it was liberation. And Loretta Lynn, even at 90, was still rewriting what it meant to be honest. Loretta's confession about James Dean may have stunned fans, but the truth is, her list was not made up of men she only admired from the silver screen. Many of the actors she desired were men she actually met, brushed shoulders with, or exchanged polite smiles with during the height of her fame. The crossroads of Nashville and Hollywood was not as distant as people might imagine. During the 1960s and 70s, country stars were often invited onto late-night talk shows, television specials, award ceremonies, and even film premieres, which meant Loretta, the most powerful woman in country music, was suddenly standing under the same lights as the biggest names in cinema. At first, she admitted she felt out of place, a mountain girl in a world of tuxedos and champagne. But that shyness quickly gave way to confidence. She wasn't just some guest passing through. She was Loretta Lynn, the coal miner's daughter, and Hollywood knew exactly who she was. In these glittering rooms, she saw the actors she had once only known on the movie screen, now laughing, drinking, and telling stories just a few steps away. She remembered her first time at the Academy Awards as a presenter, and how she nearly stumbled when she spotted one of the actors on her private list sitting in the audience. She smiled about it years later, admitting that she almost forgot her lines because his presence rattled her. These moments revealed that her list wasn't born purely out of fantasy. It was shaped by real encounters, brief interactions where Loretta found herself captivated by charm, wit, or sheer charisma. Unlike James Dean, who lived only in her imagination, many of these men carried the energy of real conversations and lingering handshakes. Hollywood and Nashville may have been different kingdoms, but in Loretta's world, they collided often enough to make her secret desires tangible. She would sit at tables beside movie icons, share casual banter backstage, and even dance at after-parties, all while hiding her thoughts from the cameras flashing around her. What made her honesty so striking at 90 was that she never gave in to the temptation, never allowed herself to cross the invisible boundary between admiration and action. She carried those desires quietly, sometimes as a joke with her closest friends, sometimes as a private daydream. But she never stepped beyond the line. That balance defined her legacy. She could be both the fearless woman who admitted her truths and the disciplined figure who kept her dignity intact. By the time she revealed her list, fans understood that it was not about shame or scandal, but about humanity. Loretta Lynn was showing that even the most respected women in music could look across a crowded Hollywood room, see a famous actor smile, and feel her knees weaken. It was not a flaw, but a reminder that behind every legend is a woman who still laughs, blushes, and secretly wonders, what if? If James Dean was the fantasy that symbolized youthful rebellion, Loretta's list of actors didn't stop there. She admitted that she had always been drawn to men who carried an edge of danger, the ones who looked like they might break every rule in the book, but do it with a grin that made you forgive them instantly. These were the actors mothers warned their daughters about, the kind of men who filled gossip columns with their affairs and temper, but still drew massive crowds because of their undeniable magnetism. Loretta laughed as she confessed that she was fascinated by those bad boys, even though she would never have dared to approach them. One of the names she dropped was Marlon Brando, a man whose presence alone could fill a room with electricity. Known for his raw performances and his chaotic personal life, Brando embodied everything Loretta knew was trouble, but he also embodied something she found impossible to ignore: freedom. Watching him on the screen, she felt a pull toward his fearlessness, his refusal to conform, his reckless confidence. She admitted that part of her wondered what it would be like to be around that kind of man, even for one night. Another name she hinted at was Warren Beatty, Hollywood's notorious ladies' man. Beatty had a reputation so vast it almost eclipsed his acting career, yet Loretta spoke of him with humor, calling him the type who could charm any woman in a room without even trying. For a woman who had spent her life married to one man, Loretta's attraction to the dangerous and untamed made perfect sense. It was not about wanting to abandon her values, but about peeking into a world she was never allowed to live in. These men were everything her life was not: impulsive, glamorous, reckless, and unapologetically selfish. By admitting she desired them, Loretta revealed a part of herself that longed for adventure, even if only in her imagination. But she also made it clear that these were passing fantasies, not regrets. She never acted on them, never sought out scandal, but she wasn't afraid to admit that even a country legend could look at Marlon Brando or Warren Beatty and feel her pulse quicken. To fans, this was startling, because Loretta had always been tied to an image of tradition and modesty. Yet the truth is, her songs had always hinted at this same fire. She wrote about infidelity, temptation, and desire not because she lived recklessly, but because she understood those emotions deeply. Naming the dangerous ones on her list was her way of acknowledging that inside her lived a restless spirit, one that dreamed of wild roads and untamed love. It was not scandalous, it was liberation, and it proved that even the queen of country music had moments where she wanted the men her mama warned her about. Loretta's list wasn't made up entirely of rebels and bad boys. For every Marlon Brando or Warren Beatty she admitted to secretly desiring, there were also men who represented something very different. Grace, refinement, and a kind of charm that didn't need scandal to make it powerful. Loretta confessed that part of her heart was always pulled toward gentlemen, men who carried themselves with elegance, who could walk into a room without raising their voice and still command every eye. One of those names was Cary Grant, the silver-haired icon of Hollywood, whose debonair style made him the definition of a leading man. Loretta spoke of Grant as the kind of man who looked like he would treat a woman with respect, pull out her chair, pour her a glass of champagne, and make her laugh with a simple remark. For a woman who spent much of her life fighting through hardship and a marriage filled with storms, Cary Grant represented the dream of ease, of being cherished instead of battled. Another name that slipped from her lips was Gregory Peck, a man known not only for his commanding screen presence, but also for his intelligence and dignity. Loretta admired him because he embodied everything she longed to see in a man: kindness, strength, and a quiet confidence that didn't need to shout. To her, Gregory Peck was proof that attraction wasn't just about looks or danger. It was about a soul that seemed steady, reliable, and protective. As Loretta reflected, these gentlemen weren't just crushes. They symbolized the kind of men she wished more women encountered in real life. They reminded her that not every dream had to be reckless. Some dreams were about safety, about the fantasy of a man who would never raise his hand in anger or break his promises. In a life where she had endured countless challenges, the thought of being adored by men like Cary Grant or Gregory Peck was a gentle escape, a reminder that tenderness could be as intoxicating as rebellion. What made her admission even more striking was that Loretta didn't separate these fantasies from the realities of her life. She never pretended to be perfect, never denied that she admired men outside of her marriage, but she also never blurred the lines between admiration and betrayal. Her confessions about the gentlemen she adored were not scandal. They were acknowledgments of the softer, hidden dreams that lived inside her. And at 90 years old, she felt no shame in revealing them. It showed the world that while she could be drawn to the danger of Hollywood's wild men, she was equally captivated by the grace of its gentlemen, proving that her desires were as layered and complex as the songs she sang throughout her career. When Loretta Lynn's confession about the 7 actors she secretly desired made its way into the public eye, reactions were as wide and varied as the career she had built over nearly 7 decades. Some fans howled with laughter, delighted by the idea that the coal miner's daughter, who had spent her life singing about cheating men, wayward lovers, and strong women, was now peeling back the curtain and admitting her own private fantasies. To them, it was proof of her humanity, a reminder that even icons get starstruck, even legends can blush, and even a 90-year-old woman can still talk about desire without shame. Others, however, were shocked. To more conservative fans who had always seen Loretta as a figure of morality and tradition, her words felt almost scandalous, as if she had broken some invisible rule that country royalty should never confess such things. Whispers filled fan clubs, and heated debates broke out across social media, with some defending her right to speak freely, while others wrung their hands over the boldness of her honesty. But perhaps the most interesting reactions came from within her own family. Loretta's children, who had spent their entire lives watching their mother fight for respect in a man's world, weren't surprised by her boldness, but they admitted they were a little stunned by the names she chose to reveal. Some chuckled, embarrassed but amused, joking that they could already imagine the headlines spinning across the tabloids. Others felt protective, worrying that people might twist her words into something they weren't, turning a grandmother's playful honesty into unnecessary scandal. Yet Loretta herself remained unfazed. She had lived too long and fought too hard to care what others thought at this stage of her life. She reminded her children and her fans that she had never built her career on silence. From the very beginning, Loretta had been the woman who said what others were afraid to say, who sang about birth control when it was banned on the radio, who wrote about divorce when it was considered taboo, and who spoke up for women when the industry wanted her to sit down and smile. Why, then, would she stop telling the truth just because it made some people uncomfortable? Loretta laughed at the idea that people thought she was too old to have such thoughts. She insisted that desire doesn't retire with age, and that humor doesn't fade just because the years pile up. To her, confessing the 7 actors she secretly longed for was not a betrayal of her legacy, but a continuation of it. A living, breathing reminder that honesty, no matter how uncomfortable, was always her gift to the world. And whether fans laughed, blushed, or shook their heads in disbelief, Loretta had once again done what she had always done best. She made people talk, she made them think, and above all, she made them remember her. Loretta's confession about her 7 secret Hollywood crushes wasn't just an amusing anecdote. It was a revelation that revealed more about her character than any tabloid headline ever could. Throughout her life, Loretta Lynn had built a reputation as the truth-teller of country music, the woman who would stand on stage at the Grand Ole Opry or on national television and sing songs that others told her to keep quiet. She was never afraid to be controversial, never afraid to risk the wrath of men who ran the industry, and never willing to compromise the stories she believed women needed to hear. By the time she was 90 years old, she had nothing left to prove to anyone, and so this confession was not about shock, it was about freedom. It showed that even in her final years, she remained unafraid to speak her mind, even on topics that many of her peers would have considered improper. More than that, it showed that Loretta Lynn never stopped being human. For too long, society places women, especially older women, into boxes. They are expected to be matriarchs, grandmothers, and caretakers, but they are not expected to speak openly about desire or fantasy. Loretta shattered that expectation with a single list. She proved that age does not erase attraction, that the human heart and the human imagination remain alive no matter how many decades pass. For her fans, it was both liberating and comforting, a reminder that you don't stop being yourself when you reach 90. You just get braver about admitting who you really are. It also reinforced the very core of her artistry. Loretta's music had always been about peeling away the polite mask of society and revealing the truth beneath it. Songs like Rated X and The Pill scandalized traditionalists because they dared to show what women were really thinking and feeling. Her confession about the 7 actors was cut from the same cloth. It was her way of telling the world that honesty does not have an expiration date. To Loretta, hiding behind shame had never been an option, and she wasn't about to start now. Her courage to admit what others would have kept hidden showed that she valued truth above reputation. And that was precisely what made her timeless. When she laughed about her choices, when she spoke their names without hesitation, she was teaching a final lesson: that vulnerability and humor are as powerful as strength and defiance. What it said about Loretta Lynn was simple but profound. She was a woman who lived unapologetically, who carried her humanity with pride, and who reminded the world that even queens of country music are not immune to private daydreams and playful fantasies. In revealing them, she gave permission for everyone else to embrace theirs. In the end, Loretta Lynn's confession about the 7 actors she secretly longed for was not a scandal, not a betrayal of the legacy she spent a lifetime building. It was the perfect punctuation mark on a career defined by fearless honesty. For decades, Loretta had been the woman who pulled back the curtain on the truths no one wanted to hear. She sang about marriages that were falling apart when Nashville preferred to promote fairy tales. She sang about birth control when radio stations threatened to ban her. She sang about the struggles of women, mothers, and wives long before it was fashionable to do so. Every time she stood up with a microphone in her hand, she was telling the world, "This is real life, and you cannot silence it." That is why her revelation at 90 years old carried so much weight. It wasn't just a list of 7 famous men. It was a declaration that she would never stop being Loretta Lynn, the woman who told the truth no matter how it sounded. By naming those actors, she stripped away the last barrier between her public image and her private humanity. She reminded fans that even country music's queen of tradition had desires, fantasies, and moments of humor that made her every bit as human as the people who adored her. And in doing so, she gave permission for others, especially women of her generation, to laugh at their own private secrets instead of hiding them. Her family may have felt some embarrassment, her fans may have been divided, but history will not remember the shock. History will remember the courage. Loretta's honesty was never about stirring gossip. It was about freedom. At 90 years old, she refused to be placed on a pedestal as an untouchable saint. She wanted to be remembered as a woman who lived fully, who loved deeply, and who laughed at herself along the way. That is why her confession struck a chord. It wasn't a fall from grace. It was grace itself, grace in the form of unfiltered truth. For younger generations, it became a reminder that aging does not mean fading. Desire does not disappear with wrinkles, and humor does not vanish with years. Loretta showed that you can live boldly until your final days, unashamed of the things that make you laugh or the memories that make your heart race. In many ways, this confession was the final verse of the song she had been singing her whole life. Just as Coal Miner's Daughter told the story of her poverty, just as You Ain't Woman Enough told the story of her defiance, and just as The Pill told the story of her rebellion, her confession told the story of her humanity. It was a simple truth, but a powerful one, that even icons dream, even legends laugh, and even queens of country music carry secret crushes in the quiet corners of their minds. For Loretta Lynn, it was never about the 7 actors themselves. It was about breaking the silence once more, refusing to let shame or judgment dictate the end of her story. And so the legacy of Loretta's honesty lives on. Fans will always remember her music, her grit, and her rise from Butcher Hollow to the top of the charts. But they will also remember that final confession, the playful list that proved she was still Loretta, unfiltered, unafraid, and unashamed. At 90 years old, she gave the world one last gift, the truth, wrapped in laughter, whispered with a wink, and carried like a badge of freedom. That is why Loretta Lynn will never be forgotten. She was not only the coal miner's daughter, not only the queen of country, but also the woman who reminded us that being human is the bravest legacy of all.